Welcome back to Marketing Table Talk, where industry experts share their view on how brands can stand out and be competitive in today's marketplace. I'm Lisa Perry, your host, a global brand marketing executive, and today we're going to talk about a really exciting topic, the lean startup marketing formula. And according to data, 95% of startups fail. That's a staggering number. But the lean startup approach is less risky, emphasizing rapid experimentation and solving problems that truly matter to customers. We're going to dive deep into this with an industry expert, Cain Castor. He is the managing director of Hotbox Digital, a digital marketing agency that covers the full spectrum from marketing to execution, specializing in the cannabis industry. Cain, welcome to the show, my friend.
Lisa, thank you so much for having me. It's a pleasure. And I'm just very excited to be here, talk to you about some marketing and hopefully help some people figure out some things along the way.
Well, I've already had a number of folks reach out to me about this topic, eager to learn more. So let's dive in. And before we start, there's probably some folks on tuning in today wondering what is the lean startup approach. So let's start there. Share with us what it is.
Yeah, so the lean startup approach at the core, to oversimplify it almost, I would say it is building the boat as you sail it. It's, hitting the open water on a raft with the goal of creating a ship that can take you where you want to go. A little bit more specific, it's a methodology. There's a very, very famous book that details all about it. I won't go into all the details, but essentially, it is a methodology that keeps your business agile, focused on quick operations, and really at the core, it's doing things for a little bit cheaper, doing it faster, and just overall simplifying down everything into really what matters.
I like what you said about that, doing it faster. When we were in COVID, there were businesses, before COVID, taking years to go to market. And then when COVID came out, they were taking out things, putting to market in a couple of weeks. So we know it's possible, right? But I like the approach that you're talking about, doing it methodically and replicating with the process. I like what you're talking about. Tell us, for those entrepreneurs out there, why do a lean startup approach versus just a traditional startup approach that they're doing? Why even think about this?
Yeah, well, I would say it takes the idea of agile project management and it expands it across the entire business. With a lot of these lean startups, you'll find that they get to market a lot quicker. Like you mentioned, traditional startup approach, it might take years of just trying to perfect everything, trying to create the perfect impression before putting yourself out there. With the lean startup, it's really about creating something, putting it out there, seeing what the market feedback is, and iterating. If you really wanted to boil it down to 3 words, it's test, analyze, and decide. That's what you're doing over and over. You're really doing it from day one. And it just cuts down the amount of time, effort, money, and resources before you can start getting some market feedback, which really is the most important thing with a lot of startups. You don't spend too much time trying to perfect the strategy before you go and create your action plan and just get out there and start doing it.
Yeah, and that's so important, is to get that customer feedback, right? Which can help you get that competitive advantage, is getting in front of customers and hearing what they say, and being quick versus your competitors, cutting down that 95% fail rate, right?
Right.
The more that you can connect with your customers, I think the better you are. There's probably this fear that doing so gives away your hand, right? And maybe that's a myth that's not true. What are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, I think to a degree, you are letting the market and your competitors know what you have coming, but I think it almost comes down to what's more important, your competitors having some insight on you or you having some insight on your target audience.
Mhm.
I think 9 times out of 10, focusing on the target audience and what they really want, what they really have to say is going to take you so much further than almost anything else. You know, you can run the focus groups, you can do the market research, and all those things have their time and place and they are important. But I would argue something that's more important is getting something out there, seeing how the public responds to it, and then using that to inform your decisions going forward.
Yeah, and that's so true because what I've seen is a lot of startups lose that approach of getting in tune with their customers and getting really finite about solving that problem. And they see a trajectory of sales, and then it starts to fall off because they've lost that connection with their customers. And that truly is the competitive advantage. It's weighing that risks, right? Of getting that competitive advantage of knowing your customers really, really well to what you're saying, right?
Absolutely. And I think you'll see certain companies do everything except just try to talk and connect with their customer to try to get some insight. They'll, spend money on market research. They'll go with big consulting firms to find data to try to find conclusions where, some of the startups that I've worked with in the past, when they've reached an issue trying to figure out how to break through a sales plateau or figure out a product extension, you know, we find most of the time the easiest thing is to send out some type of questionnaire or just connect with some of your biggest brand advocates. And that's one of the pieces of this lean startup approach that simplifies everything down. It's trading in, the over the top, time consuming, expensive tactics for the things that may not be, traditionally correct, but tend to work more effectively.
And what are some of the core principles that this is involved in this lean startup approach and that are essential for our audience to understand?
Definitely. I would say there are some core principles that are organization wide, regardless of department. And then there's a few that are specific to branding and marketing. I would say one of the core pieces is entrepreneurship. I think these lean startups that are most effective and find the most success, they have free thinkers and self starters that head up the different departments. They're not the ones to wait for check-ins or for approvals to try things out and to try to, find a little corner of the market that they can get ahead. A lot of the times they move quick, they're self-starters. And that brings me to point number two, which is a scientific testing approach. Testing is very important. It's test, analyze, decide. Do you iterate? Do you continue moving with it? Or do you make an adjustment? Or do you cut it out completely? I would say at the core, organization wide, those are the two things. Always trying to find ways for more efficiency operationally. And then on the marketing side, I would say it's things like branding. Branding is a very core tenet of a lean startup approach. I think without a solid brand, you might sell units, but it would be hard to create loyalty and create something long term. And then finally, I would say speed, just trying to do everything quick, trying to get things into the market as fast as possible and find that feedback as soon as you can.
And for those that are startups that are hesitant about branding, what would you say to them on why that's so important?
Absolutely. I mean, the brand is everything. The brand is really what people say about you when you're not in the room, but you are the person that can control the perception people have of you, and you can't make them say something about you, but you can heavily suggest what they should be saying. A lot of the times with startups that are hesitant about branding, I actually have a system. I call it brand market brand, where essentially I start out and I build an MVB, a minimum viable brand. This is, in my opinion, the essentials and the basics that every business should have when going into the market. I don't think it's doing branding justice, and it's not going to be the thing that you end with, but it will be enough to give you a good look in the market. So what I tend to do is build a minimum viable brand with a basic brand strategy. Pretty much I'll pick out archetypes, which are the base of your brand's personality. I'll come up with your promise, mission, vision, which is, for those who don't know, essentially it's who you are, why you do what you do, and the long-term impact that you hope to have with your business. And then finally, I will do positioning. that pretty much puts everything together into a short formulaic paragraph that says who you're targeting, who you're going for, what difference you plan to make, and how you fit in. Um, After that, I think it's very important to really not skimp out on the visual aspect of branding. I think so much is communicated visually, and that's how you're going to make the strongest first impression. I think once you have those pieces, you can launch and start to generate revenue with the intention of coming back to work on the rest of your brand strategy and personality a little bit down the road. But if you don't have those initial pieces, it's going to be really hard for you to authentically market and really set yourself apart from your competitors. And if you're not going to do that, then realistically, you're not going to have many legs in the market unless you have a truly revolutionary product.
Right. And with the testing and iterate, I'm curious about that as well, because when people set up different strategies and tactics, um, what kind of recommendations can you give to effectively test and iterate, so that they can quickly make adjustments and move forward? Because you could test and iterate for long periods of time, but what are some strategies and tactics that they can think about for testing and iterate different things that they're doing with their planning, marketing strategy?
Yeah, absolutely. Well, I think coming into a marketing strategy for a lot of lean startups, I think it makes sense to start with the tried and true things that work. For example, if you're a B2B company, you know you're going to be doing some form of multi-channel outreach. So start with what works. But then from there, there's no core tenet of a marketing plan that's going to stand without testing. So I think very early on, you would want to understand what metrics you want to test for. Use your first, campaign, which could last anywhere from a couple of weeks to a couple of days, depending on, your investment level, I suppose. And just tracking those metrics period after period to see if you are seeing the growth that you want. And I think there's a lot of, I'd say, vanity metrics that a lot of marketers tend to use, things like impressions, which of course are important, but I think so much comes down to, um, is the tactic that you're testing driving the results that you want, whether it be page views, conversions,
Mm.
sales. Those are the specific metrics that I would say are important to look for in testing. And then I think after testing, it comes the analysis. It's trying to understand what each of these metrics mean and if it's pushing your business in the right direction. That can be harder, when you're testing some things that are a little bit more abstract, but it does become clear after a few testing periods which tactics are and aren't working. And I think at that point, it's practicing non-attachment to the ideas and letting things go that just aren't working.
Oh, I love that. I love that non-attachment, right?
Yes.
Because it's a big deal, right? People get really married to certain strategies and tactics, and you do have to emotionally stand away from what's going on. That's an important thing. Everybody, listen to that non-attachment. Um,
Yes.
Another thing I wanted to ask is, do in this test, iterate, an analysis phase, do you suggest connecting with customers during this phase?
Definitely. I mean, the sooner you can get in front of customers, the better. I think depending on, again, what type of product you are, if you're a product business and you use a software such as Shopify where you enable reviews, those can be some of the initial pieces of feedback you get. I think another key way to get some of that feedback are to do, product quizzes, nurture campaigns post purchase just to try to get some data back. I also think SMS marketing is a really, really effective way to start to get some reviews. There's a couple platforms out there that after a purchase, you can program it for a week, maybe 2 weeks after your customer has got your product. And you can send a follow-up text message to have them rate your product 1 to 5. It's super simple. It's not very invasive. SMS text marketing is it's a form of marketing with the highest open and deliverability rate. And if it's a simple thing like, hey, I saw you recently bought, insert product here. What did you think from 1 to 5? Reply with a number. Sometimes all it takes is that to just get those little bits of feedback on the customer experience that you're creating.
And when do you make a decision to change? If you get like 3 or 4 people commenting, do you make a change based on that small of a number? Like what constitutes a change for people?
Yeah, that's a great question, and I think everyone is a little bit different. I think, in my opinion, 3 to 4 is definitely on the lower side. I think if you wanted to go with a key rule of thumb for statistics, you either want to go with a percentage of your overall audience as a sample size, and you never want to have less than 30 reviews. So I would say if you can get 30 data points, that's the absolute minimum that you would want to make a conclusion from. Then again, if you are out and let's say you have a very successful launch month and you sell, you know, 10,000 units of your product, 30 reviews probably isn't enough. So I'd look to determine what percentage of my overall audience I'd want to hear from. And that just depends on what type of product I'm selling and how big my audience is. If I'm a B2B company that's, trying to sell to Fortune 500 companies, well, there's only 500 companies I could hear from. So then if I were to hear back from 5 to 10 companies that I wasn't doing a great job, that holds a lot more weight than, if I have a potential audience of 10 million health and wellness customers and I hear back from 10 people, I probably wouldn't pull too much of a conclusion from that as a percentage of that audience.
Yeah, that's a great recommendation. So with these principles that you've talked about, how can folks take them and integrate them into a marketing campaign for practical application?
Absolutely. I took a couple notes on this one because there's so much that you can do to take away, but I boiled it down to a couple points. I think at the beginning, research heavily. I think there is nothing more important than understanding your audience. And if there is anything that you do want to take a little bit more time on, it's on that research process. After that, I think it's, once you have that information, you can start building your minimum viable product. You can start building your marketing campaigns. But I would say keep your marketing strategies very light, and focus on the action plan. I don't think there's much merit anymore to building out, these 100-page marketing strategies when you're a startup that's fresh to the market. I think it's more understanding what other people in similar industries do and building something as quick as possible to get out there. And then I would say, as early as you can, look into software that can help you build and automate as fast as possible. I think some of the most effective campaigns that I've been a part of in the past have been, taking a small team of 2 or 3 people, using 2 or 3 different pieces of software, and then using that to scale up into, 7 figures a year. I think you can really get to that point with focusing on one marketing channel, focusing on a good follow-up system, and just developing a quality minimum viable product.
Yeah, I like what you said there is being focused, automating, not going so, having a marketing plan that is, you know, appealing for everybody. Keep it simple. I remember when we worked together, we had a marketing plan that was a one pager, right?
Right.
You don't have to appeal to everybody. It just has to be effective in what you're doing. It has to have the nuts and bolts. So I like what you're saying there in terms of the key elements that are going to really drive the revenue and the conversion. That's really what you're focused on in terms of the startups. Focus on what matters, and make it effective. You talked about some things like automation and tech stack and things like that. What are some resources that folks could leverage to help them get up and running quickly, that you talked about there?
Definitely. Well, what I'll say is, for an example of a product focused company, a consumer packaged good company, I would say 80 to 90% that I encounter, I tend to have the same introductory tech stack that I like to use and the same recommendations. Number one, you need a CRM. For me, that's HubSpot. HubSpot has an amazing free platform. it has so much functionality and it integrates with almost anything that you can think of, um, to just keep your marketing effective and cheap. That being said, if you do want to, once you scale, HubSpot scales with you. So you can eventually get to paying, a few thousand a month for some very intense functionality. But when you're first starting, you don't really need that. You just need a way to communicate. You need a place where you can keep all of your customers. And that's generally where I do it. Second, I like Klaviyo for email and text marketing. It's easy to design. It's very intuitive. It's easy to scale, and it's very affordable. And then finally, Zapier. Zapier is, I cannot speak highly enough about Zapier. Zapier, if I were to break it down, it lets you link tools together that otherwise don't integrate, and it lets you do it for so much cheaper than if you were to build that out yourself. In the past, I'm not a developer. I don't know how to code, but in the past, I've been able to develop marketing systems that I've gone out and gotten quotes for that would cost, over $10,000 to build custom. And I've been able to, you know, build something comparable for less than $200 per month.
Yeah.
So, that's taking that $10,000 that you're now saving that could be used on reinforcing product, ad spend, etc. But yeah, I would say those three are kind of the core of everything that I do when it comes to a new company. And that builds out the system from nurture all the way through post-purchase when you're trying to develop loyalty. The last piece you really need is some way to get in front of new people and to build awareness. And I think depending on your audience, it's either going to be Meta, which is Facebook and Instagram ads, or maybe Google, or if you have a younger audience, let's say, 16 to 27 range, that's where TikTok ads really start to come into play. So if you can do some form of advertising to get yourself out there, the rest of that tech stack is very cheap, affordable, light, scalable, that can nurture your audience and get your purchases, and then create your first brand advocates on the back end after they do purchase.
So for those looking to implement this, what are some challenges that they need to be aware of when looking to kick this off?
Yeah, that's a good question. I think when it comes to lean startup marketing, I think there's just so much possibility out there. I think the number one thing you can have is focus. If you're able to find something and test something that works, focus on that. And don't try to go do all of this other stuff that, you might see people talk about on YouTube or on LinkedIn. Don't follow every shiny object. Focus on what works. If you are a product-based company that's selling to young people, test your TikTok ads and build out the rest of your tech marketing system and just let it operate and just see what works. Once you find something that works, if you have a single product and you dominate a single channel, that's really all you need to get to seven figures. If you want to if you want to create $1 million business, I think one product, one audience, one marketing channel, if you can do that perfectly, you can reach that point. You don't need to go and do 10 marketing channels. You don't need to test out all of these different things. I mean, you should test, but you don't need to create a specific plan for everything. Focus on one or two things, and that's going to be successful for you.
Yeah, it's so true, right? When you, it's the same with the target audience. When you are too broad in all that you're doing, you're not as effective. The more focused you can be on one specific thing that solves your customer's problem, the better you are in converting those sales, and then you can start to branch off. But get good at one thing really quickly, which sounds like this approach is all about. What happens when your assumptions, your strategies aren't aligning with the customer's feedback along the way? What happens then?
Yeah, I mean, I think that's really when, trying to mellow your ego and practice non-attachment comes in. I think, marketers are kind of like diet salespeople. Like, we have ego, we want to see sales. Like, it feels so good when we launch a campaign and it works. And nothing feels worse than building something, putting the time, effort, and care to it, starting to identify with it and just see it fall flat on its face. I think a really powerful trait is just being aware and not taking it personally. The sooner you could look at something and say, hey, we've invested $5,000 into this. We're really not seeing much. This campaign's not working. Let's cut it. Let's start from ground zero and let's try something else that works.
Okay, and that was awesome. Self-awareness and put your ego aside, because it really is not about you. It is about the customer. You got into it because you were wanting to solve a problem out there for for people out in the marketplace, and that's what you got to keep in mind. It is not about you. This is not about, as you said, your ego. Let's take some questions out there. I think we've got one here from Michael Willis. What strategies do startups use to stay competitive in the crowded digital advertising space, especially when competing against more prominent established players? Great question. Cain, what do you say to this?
Yeah, Michael, great question. It's nice to chat with you here. I would say when you're facing big established players, you're not going to beat them in a game of covering everything or trying to do everything. Like if you're starting a beverage company and you're up against Coca-Cola, you aren't going to be able to sell in Taiwan, Mexico, and the United States at the same time. I think it's really niching down. I think the power is in niching down and focusing on one thing, like I mentioned. Coca-Cola might be in every store, but you could be the beverage brand that's focused on, Gen Z health and wellness people. And that way you can focus on being the absolute best at that one product for that one audience on one single platform. If you could be the best company doing TikTok content, TikTok advertising, have landing pages designed and developed for that niche, and have follow-up marketing with it, you're going to do great. Funny enough, there's actually a water brand out there called Gen Z Water, and they've taken this insane design approach, completely ironic, but it really connects with the humor of Gen Z. So if you want a real life example of someone that's kind of doing that, especially as a water brand, they're a great example, and I would say Liquid Death is a great example.
Oh,
Um,
that Liquid Death is amazing for those of you that haven't seen that out there. That is a really great. I've got to check out Gen Z. We've got another question here. How can a lean startup make sure they aren't getting sucked into the data noise and make decisions that are informed?
Definitely. Well, I think this is something that I had to almost go through the ringer to figure this part out. I used to think every metric was important, until one day 4 or 5 years ago, I presented some metrics to a client. I was talking about impressions and page views, and at the end of the day, they said, "Hey, where are the sales?" And I had no way to back up anything. Especially in cannabis, it's difficult because you're not doing e-commerce, so you don't have your own connection to the data. I would say at the beginning of your campaign, pick out metrics that are important. I think the top two are always going to be return on ad spend and your cost of acquisition per customer. There are other things that I find important that don't directly relate to sales, but relate to your long-term growth. I think things like, search traffic, just how much traffic your website's getting in general. Even things on social media like page views, if you can show that you're getting a consistent increase, or you can see you got a certain amount of followers after an advertising or an influencer campaign, that is a way to show you that even if you don't get sales right away, people are starting to enter your digital ecosystem. And then from that, you're essentially nurturing them over time. So
Yeah,
then that's when you'll start to see a jump in sales. And then you can attribute those sales to your return on ad spend with an influencer campaign before.
love it. Everybody here. Oh, we've got everybody here, I want you to jot down Cain Castor's name. He is giving some amazing advice on lean startups, digital marketing. Go over to LinkedIn, send a personalized request, tell them you saw him here on Marketing Table Talk, connect with him. Cain, is there anywhere else that people can connect with you?
You can connect with me there. You guys can send me an email. You can email me at cain@hotbox.digital, CAIN at hotbox.digital. You can check out my website. I'm starting to open up to other industries. For the past 5 years, I've been primarily doing cannabis and technology. If you want to check out some of my cannabis work, my website is hotbox.digital. And those are the easiest ways to reach me.
That is great. And they just put the email here in the comments. And everyone, thank you so much for tuning in today on this amazing topic at Marketing Table Talk. And come back next month for another episode of Marketing Table Talk. Cain, thank you so much for sharing some amazing strategies on the lean startup approach on business. It's been wonderful. And everyone, until next month, thank you so much.
Thank you. Thank you for having me.